It's loading. All right, great. Well, I think we are at time now. So good afternoon and a hearty welcome to everybody here to the first meeting of the Technical Working Group supporting DLCD staff.
Good.
I think it's the live stream. Will you turn it off?
I can't turn the lights. Let's do it. Hold on.
Okay. I'm not hearing myself echo. All right. So a hearty welcome to everyone, and thank you very much for participating this afternoon. So again, in case we missed that because of the technical issue, this is the first meeting of the Technical Working Group that is going to be supporting DLCD staff on the Farm and Forest Conservation Program Improvements Project. And before we get started, a few housekeeping things. So these meetings are going to be hybrid. They're being run in person and online on Zoom. And I think most of us by now are fairly familiar with the Zoom platform mechanics, but if you have any questions, please drop a chat to Angela Williamson, who is going to be providing technical support for this project, and she can help you out with any questions that you have. If you aren't able to reach her through the Zoom chat, her contact information, including phone number and email, are at the bottom left of the agenda for this meeting. For folks who are members of the Technical Working Group, if you have questions during the conversation or would like to comment, go ahead and raise your hand in the Zoom platform using the raise hand emoji. And if you're in the room, just wave and I'll go ahead and call on folks. And Angela is also going to help me watch for raised hands and monitor the chat throughout all of these meetings. For folks who are not members of the Technical Working Group and who may be following online, I just want to reiterate that we are very much interested in hearing comments from folks out in the general public and other stakeholders who aren't in these working group conversations. So these meetings are being live streamed on DLCD's YouTube channel. Recordings of these meetings are going to be posted to the project website, and comments at any point in time can be directed to me at hillary.foot@dlcd.oregon.gov. And that email address is also on the project website and in the bottom left of the agenda for this meeting. I see Tamara's participating via telephone. Let's see, that is going to be.
Yeah.
So before I get started in the meeting today, let's do introductions. So I'll start with DLCD staff here today, and then we'll go around the room, and then I'll go ahead and call on folks online. So if I haven't met you yet, I am Hillary Foot, and I am the Farm and Forest Land Use Specialist for Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD. And prior to joining DLCD almost 4 years ago now, it's gone by very fast, I was the planner with Tillamook County and worked there on farm and forest issues for several years. All right, so Angela, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, I'm Angela Williamson. I'm the Grants Periodic Review and Admin Specialist for the CSC Community Services Division. That's why I'm helping Hillary with this group. Welcome, everyone.
And Jim.
Hello, everyone. Jim Johnson, Oregon Department of Agriculture. I'm the Land Use and Water Planning Coordinator there. I've been at ODA 27 years now, I think. I was Hillary before Hillary at DLCD. Was a county planner before that, just like Hillary, with Wasco County and Klickitat County. And I also was on the original staff of the Columbia River Gorge Commission doing their farm and forest work there. So hello, everyone. I think I know a lot of you. Good to see you, Matry.
All right, and Mike.
I'm Mike McCarthy. I farm in Parkdale, McCarthy Family Farm. I've been in land use work in Oregon for 43 years now.
That's pretty amazing. That's like a long time. Jackie.
You want us to move it first, like,
Yeah, we should hold on over. You look lovely today, so.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jackie Dyke Jones. I'm a farmer in Western Washington County.
And Blair Batson.
Hey y'all, I'm Blair Batson. I'm a staff attorney at 1000 Friends of Oregon. I took a 20-year break from being a staff attorney at 1000 Friends of Oregon and just started again in January of this year. And my expertise is primarily in goals 3 and 4, farm and forest land protection.
It's very fun to actually run across documents in this room that Blair has written. And I see online, actually, the CSD Service Division Manager has joined us. Gordon, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I'm a little late. I'm Gordon Howard with the Community Services Division Manager, and I'm looking forward to the work this group is going to be doing.
Right, and then also online, we have our Land Conservation and Development Commission Liaison, Barbara Boyer.
Good afternoon, everybody. Barbara Boyer, farmer out of Yamhill County, and I look forward to learning from all of you during this process.
And also online, we have our Community Interaction Action Committee member, Artemio Paz.
Hello, everyone. I'm visiting you from the Lower Mackenzie area. I've been on a F2 piece of property for 50 years, and it's FSC certified. And I also have an organic blueberry farm that we have taken care of since 1989. And I'm looking forward to this discussion and am very interested in natural climate solution landscapes, carbon sequestration, and biodiversity in our working lands habitats.
It's great. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So then also online, why don't we go ahead and Gail, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gail Henriksen. I'm the Community Development Director for Clatsop County.
All right, thank you. And Ian.
Hi, I'm Ian Sisson, Senior Planner with Clatsop County.
It's great to have you both here today. And Matry.
Hi, I'm Matry Sinha. I'm the Senior Rural Planner with Washington County.
Very excited to have you here as well. And Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Hughes. I'm the Planning Director for Clackamas County.
And Tamara on the phone.
Hi there, thank you. Hello, this is Tamara Mabbitt. I'm currently the Morrow County Planning Director. I'm in my 33rd year as being a county planner in rural Eastern Oregon. And I grew up on a small dairy farm in Josephine County, about 200 head of cattle, which is tiny by today's standards. So that's my real life experience with farm and forest. Thank you. Looking forward to this very much.
And Tamara was also briefly the DLCD regional representative for Eastern Oregon before she left us for Morrow County. All right, Nellie.
Hi, everyone. Nellie McAdams. I'm with Oregon Agricultural Trust.
All right, and Christian.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm a farmer in Yamhill County. I grow and manage hazelnut orchards in Yamhill and Clackamas County.
Thank you. And then we have a couple folks from our sister agencies here today as well. So Joy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joy Vaughn. I'm the ODFW, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife Land Use and Waterway Alterations Coordinator. So similar to Jim's position, coordinate with DLCD and local governments on land use, and excited to be here to learn from you all, and nice to meet you all.
And I think last but certainly not least, John.
Hi, John DeKarzik. I am the Policy and Analysis Manager across a wide range of subjects at ODF, Oregon Department of Forestry. And like Joy, looking forward to the opportunity to hear and learn.
Did I miss anybody online? Don't think so. All right, great. So I am very excited. Clearly, there's a real depth of experience in this working group. You know, there are members here who have long tenures as planning practitioners. You have folks who are deeply familiar with the legal history of both programs, and many folks here who live the program day in and day out as they're working lands that are protected under it. So I'm really looking forward to working with you all. And I want to take a moment and recognize that you are donating your time to this effort. And I definitely would be remiss in not expressing my deep appreciation for that, for the time that you've taken to work on these issues with this group. All right, so for the rest of the meeting today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the process, the journey that will be going on over the next couple of months as we're scoping essentially a work plan for the agency. And then I'm going to review some of the fundamental concepts that underlie the program. And then we're going to be talking about next steps moving forward. So I'm going to share my screen right now because I love slides.
Do you want me to?
Yeah. And go right to the second slide. Oops. All right. So essentially what this working group is going to be doing is spending the next 3 months essentially developing a proposal for a multi-year work plan for the agency to address technical aspects of the farm and forest programs. So the first thing that we're going to be asking the working group to do is to identify issues that need to be addressed. All right, so we're going to be talking about mechanics of the existing program that aren't working as they were intended to, areas where a lack of clarity may have led to continuing controversy and appeals, or areas where there's still some debate and disagreement about interpretation. So the first task is to develop sort of a list of issues and a statement of need around those issues. The second task for the working group is to brainstorm potential ways that those identified issues can be addressed, and ways that the department could improve the farm and forest program. And when I say improve, what I mean are changes that will increase clarity and consistency of implementation of the program across the state in ways that are clearly aligned with the policy intent of goals 3 and goal 4. And I'm anticipating this could look like a number of different things. You know, so we could talk about standard rulemakings, complex rulemakings, legislative concepts. We could, talk about agency guidance documents, which don't have the force of law. We could talk about identifying data needs. We could talk about scoping a project for a fellow. So I'm actually really looking forward to creative ideas that folks might come up with in this working group on how to address, maybe from multiple angles, some of the issues that we're going to talk about. And I just want to take a quick second to be clear that we are generating ideas for potential actions, things that the department could do. Ultimately, the Land Conservation and Development Commission, LCDC, is going to be defining what actions the agency moves forward with. So just be clear that things that we brainstorm may or may not end up being put into motion through this process. Okay. And then the third task that we will have for the working group is to prioritize those issues that are identified and to prioritize those potential actions as well. So identifying issues needed to be addressed and statements of need associated with them, brainstorming action items, and then prioritization. Are there any questions about those sort of general overlying goals before I get into a little bit more detail about them? No. Okay. All right, so now I am going to talk about the primary tool that we're going to be using to focus the conversations. And so I'm going to call that the draft issues matrix. And this takes the form of an Excel workbook. So if you don't have the ability to work with Excel, please email me. And this draft issues matrix that we're going to be starting with is essentially an internal agency document that has been kept by the Farm and Forest Specialist for several years. And it is based on requests for guidance from counties, inquiries from counties, feedback from stakeholders, case law, issues that have arisen over time. And the version that we're going to be working with or starting with has been reviewed internally at DLCD for this process. So it has been revised for this project, essentially. So we're going to be starting with that list. And over the next several months, I am going to be asking you all to individually edit specific sections of that document with your thoughts prior to our meetings. And I will be compiling those thoughts and publishing them for you to think about before we meet. So there is going to be a request for work between these meetings. Hopefully that was clear when you signed up for that. All right. The final issues matrix at our November meeting is going to become the basis for a scoping summary report that DLCD staff will write, hopefully, in the end of November. Technically, this working group is advisory to DLCD staff, right? And if there are aspects of the issues that we come up with or the actions that we come up with where there's disagreement within this group, that's okay. We don't need to come to consensus. I just want to be clear about that. The final recommendations are going to be coming internally from DLCD. I'll let you know right now that it's my intention to document all of the alternative opinions in that scoping summary report so that it's available for the commission to consider. Okay. I will also be asking all of you to review a draft of that scoping summary report in November. I don't anticipate right now that we will have a 5th meeting in November to discuss comments on it, but that you'll be providing feedback or edits or thoughts on that report directly. That summary scoping report will be published for public comment in December. And we will send out a notice soliciting public feedback on that report document. And public feedback received on that report is going to be captured in a staff report that will go to LCDC for their January meeting. Okay. So all of this work is going to end up in the packet for LCDC in January. And at that January meeting, we will be presenting the report to LCDC. There will be normal public testimony and comment as there is provided at LCDC meetings. And the request of commission at that point in time is going to be providing direction to the agency on which parts of the proposal staff should move forward with. Okay, so just in sum, the draft issues matrix that we're going to be working on is going to be used to create a report and ultimately will end up in a work plan for the department to carry out, likely over a several-year period. Are there any comments or questions about that process so far? Jackie?
My question is if you are communicating with other staff throughout this, like if we, like, let's say after the October meeting, something comes up, are you going to talk with other staff, or are staff going to, I guess, ask questions? Or I'm just curious, other staff engagement, if this is going to be staff supported, I guess.
Yeah, so internally, DLCD does have a team of staff that discuss rural issues, and we have a team of staff that discuss policy issues. And so both of those teams are aware of this process and project. Gordon Howard, who is the Community Service Division Manager, and my report to him, will also be very much involved in the project and process as well. All right, before we move too much further, there are two other things that I do want to bring up about the process. So one thing I want to make sure is clear. So one of the things that will be run in parallel, and you will see in the draft issues matrix, is a simple rulemaking. So we have to do a conforming rulemaking following the 2023 session. So in order to update our rules to match 215, the changes that were made in the 23 section to 215-291, the replacement dwelling provisions, we're going to need to do a conforming rulemaking. And the agency has identified a couple of other housekeeping things that need to be done in that sort of simple conforming rulemaking. Items for conforming rulemaking are going to be in the issues matrix that you will see. Those are items that we're planning to move forward with. So I am also right now putting the groundwork in place to get a rules advisory committee up and going next year, and a request to initiate rulemaking also will be taken to the commission in January for that simple rulemaking. Even though it's a simple rulemaking, we're still planning on having a rules advisory committee with it. Because I anticipate there are some things that we might want to also include in that simple rulemaking that will be initiated hopefully in January and concluded likely before the end of Q2 next year. So I'm mentioning this hopefully to avoid any confusion between the two processes. That is going to be something that's identified as an action that we will take to address a certain set of simpler, more straightforward issues. And so as you're reviewing the issues matrix, keep in mind other sort of simple things, maybe like conforming, like codifying case law, that could be included in that simple rulemaking that we're going to be moving forward with a request for. Okay. Is that clear? Are there questions about that? Because I do feel like there's a potential for that to be confusing. The other thing that I want to clarify is there's a couple of issues that I do anticipate getting comments on. And so I want to clarify for a second what we will not be working on. Okay. So DLCD is already planning on moving forward with rulemakings that will involve our urban growth boundary exchange rules in Division 24. So that will be part of the Oregon Housing Needs Assessment rulemaking that I think is going to be starting in November. And I believe the applications for that Rules Advisory Committee are being opened up next week. I may be wrong about that, but Gordon can probably put something in the chat to correct me there. And we are also going to be initiating next year a rulemaking on solar siting in Eastern Oregon. So that is a legislatively directed rulemaking, and we're going to be required to do that. So solar siting in Eastern Oregon and urban growth boundary rules are something that we're not going to consider in this process because we're already moving forward with that in other processes. Yeah.
So I have a question. I'm aware of, and Tamara and I have worked on this for a long time. I'm aware of several issues related to energy facility siting that are cross-cutting. It's not just solar, it goes to wind, it goes to transmission lines and the like. So we will be able to bring those up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Please do bring those up. Anything that is pertinent to those other rulemaking processes, I'll go ahead and forward those comments to those rulemaking managers. Right. But there are, certain issues that I'm aware of that, won't be addressed in that venue. So Gordon has dropped into the chat clarification that but he also thinks that the owner rulemaking is going to start meeting in November. ONA, Oregon Housing Needs Assessment. Yeah. So, yeah, okay. Any other questions about that? Solar siting rulemaking already happening. Yes, there are issues that probably won't be covered in it. And again, comments received on that will be forwarded to the appropriate rulemaking managers. And if they are outside the scope of those projects, then they will be noted in this report. Okay. So in a nutshell, a successful outcome for this process is going to be a sketch for a work plan proposal. DLCD staff will present to Land Conservation Development Commission for additional feedback and direction. And if executed, the intent of that work plan is to implement improvements to the farm and forest protection programs that are consistent with the policies and those goals.
All right. Gordon has a statement in the chat.
Yes. Gordon is also noting that the energy siting rulemaking is, I don't have my glasses, is limited to solar facilities on rural lands only. Yes. And it will also be limited to Eastern Oregon as well. Okay. All right, any other questions on process, expectations, et cetera, before we move on to sort of program background and history? Patty, next slide. All right, so I give presentations on the background of the Farm and Forest program all the time, but I had a really hard time thinking about what to say today. Because for most of the folks in this working group, this is very well-traveled terrain for you all. However, I do think it's important, that we start with a shared understanding of some of the basic principles of the program. And for those folks who are following this process online through the YouTube live stream, and I think this will be helpful as well. So we were gonna go over some of this history again. All right, so, and I'm gonna talk more about exclusive farm use zoning and goal 3 and agricultural lands than I am going to talk about forest lands. And there is some history behind that. And it is also because we tend to see more conflict and more permit approvals issued on agricultural lands than on forest lands in terms of volume. But from sort of the evolution of the program perspective, goal 4 lagged goal 3 quite a bit. And I'll say that the commission at that point in time, when the goals are being implemented and when comprehensive plans were being drafted and acknowledged, took a much lighter touch with the forest lands goals. And if you want more history on that, there's a fabulous paper written by Ed Sullivan on the history of goal 4 that explains, a lot of the reason behind that. But for practical purposes today, a lot of goal 4 is effectively modeled off of goal 3 in most of the important ways. So that's why I'm going to focus more on the history of goal 3. So exclusive farm use zoning actually predates the land use planning program by over a decade. So exclusive farm use zoning was originally part of an incentive tax program that was implemented in 1961. And exclusive farm use zoning was standardized across the state in 1963. And at that point in time, the program went kind of like this. If I was a farmer and I was farming and I wanted to ensure my land would be protected for agricultural use, I could request that exclusive farm use zoning be applied to my property, and in exchange, my property would be assessed at its farm value rather than its market value. And that was a very popular tool. However, the 1960s continued to see a significant decline in the amount of prime farmland, particularly in the Willamette Valley, as it was converted to urbanized uses. Okay. So in 1973, Senate Bill 100 was enacted, which created the statewide land use planning program, and it had a partner bill, Senate Bill 101, which was enacted about the same time. Senate Bill 101 is its little lesser known companion, and that's the agricultural lands bill that revamped chapter 215 in statute, where exclusive farm use zoning has always lived and continues to live. When that happened, a couple of important things changed. So counties were required to inventory agricultural lands based on the state's definition of agricultural land, and we'll cover that in a minute. And counties were required to apply that restricted exclusive farm use zoning to protect those lands for agricultural use. Or they were required to take an exception to goal 3, the agricultural lands goal. And there are 3 pathways that most of them chose a built exception, a committed exception, but there's also a reasons exception pathway, which is the path that's most commonly used today. When that zoning became mandatory for agricultural lands, the associated tax program became a part of a suite of compensatory benefits that were conferred on owners of those lands in exchange for those restrictions. So in 1963, there were 5 non-farm uses in addition to farm dwellings that were permitted in the zone. There are over 60 now. So one of the things that Senate Bill 101 did.
Did you say, excuse me? In 1963, there were 5 uses?
Yes.
And then in 1973, when the program was
Yeah,
continued, there were still 5 uses.
there were a couple of uses that were added.
Yeah, there was like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
So not very many.
So when Senate Bill 101 was enacted, yeah, a couple of things happened. So a couple of uses were added to the list, and more importantly, the legislature created 2 buckets of uses in 215, 213. So when Senate Bill 101 happened, the sub 1 bucket appeared and the sub 2 bucket appeared. And so the legislature divided the uses into 2 different categories. And the interpretation that's implied now is that sub 1 bucket are uses the legislature determined are compatible with farm use. These are uses that counties are required to offer in their codes. And they are uses for which the county cannot apply more restrictive criteria than is in statute. And sometimes they're called uses, permitted uses or uses allowed outright. That doesn't mean that they don't need permits. They're still subject to land use review. The second bucket of uses, sub 2 uses, are uses that the legislature essentially said these are uses which may or may not be compatible with farm use. In order to determine whether they can be permitted, a county has to go through something called the farm impacts test and find that the proposal will not significantly impact farm and forest practice in the surrounding area, and it won't significantly increase the cost of those practices. It's called the Farm Impacts Test 215-296. We're going to talk about it quite a bit through this process. And it also has a little bit of interesting history. It was originally a standard that was applied to non-farm dwellings and marginal lands. So it came about in 1983. And then in 1989, the legislature applied that test to sub 2 uses. So again, in exclusive farm use zones, only uses established by the legislature are allowed. Okay. That history of the tax program sort of explains why it's so prescriptive at the state level. It is a land conservation program with associated benefits, and the restrictions are established at the state level. One other thing I wanted to say about the sub 2 use bucket is that goal 3 itself mentions sub 2 uses, and it says explicitly that sub 2 uses should be minimized to allow for maximum agricultural productivity. So that's something to keep in mind. That is one of the directives for implementation in goal 3. Okay. Let's see, we talked about the farm impact test. We talked about Brent Marr. I'll just say that interpretation of the sub 1, sub 2 use bucket comes from a case that we commonly refer to as Brent Marr. And so you might hear people use that term in these conversations. All right, before I start talking about soils, is there anything else that you could think, Jim, that's really important to mention?
Yeah, let me add a couple of things. The thing to remember about the sub 1 and sub 2 uses, the way that I describe it when I get calls, is that the sub 1 uses are basically uses that are subject to state law only. It's not necessarily that they're compatible with farm use or not, but they're subject to state law only. And if you look at several of those uses, the state law can be very detailed or it can be very wide open. So for example, utility facilities necessary for public service, sub 1 use, they have their own section of statute that's separate from that. And there's several other uses like that. So that's the sub 1 uses. A lot of people think, oh, they're permitted outright. No, they're not. Their land use decisions, they're subject to criteria. Those criteria though are identified in state law and state law only. The sub 2 uses, on the other hand, it's not only the farm impacts test, but a county can choose to even be more restrictive and not even allow the use. It can just be cut out of that. And in fact, LCDC has done that in some cases on high value farmland. And we'll talk more about that later or whatever. But the other thing to remember, and this comes up a lot in when I'm talking to farmers, that, you know, you can do this in this county, but you can't do it in that county. Sub 2 uses are also subject to local land use regulations, and some counties have concerns about certain things that they have more compatibility standards, and like other counties do not. That's totally appropriate in state law under those sub 2 categories. The other thing to remember is you've got certain land uses that have been really quite developed, regardless of their sub 1 or sub 2 uses. For example, wineries. You look at the section in the state statute for a winery, it's a sub 1 use, it's subject to state law, but it is expansive. It's expansive. There's all kinds of criteria there. And a lot of the issues that we've had over the years with that is not so much that the criteria are there or not, it's that they're not defined. And so definition is going to be a really important element of this as we go through in terms of what is agritourism. There's a whole section in state law now that's just about agritourism. And by the way, it's a sub 4 use. It's not even a sub 1 or a sub 2 use. And it's, it's got its own, and it's optional. Counties can choose to not even do it. So it really, it's, and the last thing that I'd really like to talk about is when the EFU zone first started out, it was used by both the Department of Revenue and by the Land Conservation and Development Commission. Same statute, 215. And we started to get conflicts where we would make a land use change, revenue would make a revenue change, and it would impact the other agencies. Things were, so in the late 90s, the revenue statute was separated from the land use statute. Land use kept 215, revenue went into, I believe, I always forget this, I think it's ORS 92 or something, or something. I forget, but those were separated. And the reason I was on the advisory group for that, and it was really an interesting process to really learn the connections between property tax law and land use law. So that's kind of what I just wanted to fill in here.
Yeah, that is a very good point. So Department of Revenue maintains the regulatory structure for the tax program. Lester Frakes over the DOR is the contact there for that. And we, LCDC, maintains the land use component of that program. So it's split between the two agencies. And yes, and I can't believe I forgot to mention that counties have flexibility on the sub 2 uses, because it does lead to there's certain provisions within the entire program that count for regional differences and provide counties some flexibility. And we can hit on them as we kind of go through issues where that might come up. Blair, you look like you might have wanted to add something. So,
Well, you just didn't mention, you're probably going to mention it later, but based on the Lane County case in 1998, LCDC has rulemaking authority that trumps everything in 215. So LCDC in 1994 adopted rules that did not allow or prohibited certain uses that were otherwise allowed by the EFU statute. And the Supreme Court, the Oregon Supreme Court, said that was well within LCDC's authority. So if LCDC finds that certain uses are creating a problem in agricultural land or high value farmland in particular, they have the authority to limit or completely prohibit those uses.
And that was that high value farmland. Yeah. Those uses on high value farm. So we'll talk about the soils and high value farmland in a little bit without talking about marginal plants. Christian, did you have a question?
Thank you. Yes, I think Jim answered it, but I just wanted to confirm. Jim, you said that for sub 2 uses, they are also subject to local land use laws. They are also subject to the statewide land use planning regulations as well, correct?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I mean, they're subject to anything that's in the statute for a sub 2 use, and also in LCDC's administrative rules, which many times goes beyond what's in the statute for a sub 2 use. And so, yeah, short answer, yes. And every county is a little bit different in terms of that, but that's a great point.
And where county regulations might lag state regulations. So, and this often happens because the legislature has made changes almost every session to particularly the exclusive farm use program. Then statute and rule directly apply, even if they have not sort of codified those changes in their local codes. So forest uses are somewhat similar. There was a long journey to get there, but ultimately the uses that we have in Division 6 and forest uses are established in rule, not in statute. And the commission is given that authority to do so. But they follow a similar pattern. There's essentially two buckets uses, but they're actually sub 3 and sub 4 uses. And they are sub 4 uses are like sub 2 uses, slightly different. And the test that they're subject to in rule is very similar to the farm impacts test, but also accounts for increased risk of wildfire and any increase of the proposal related to the cost of suppression.
You just reminded me of something, Hillary. When you apply the farm impacts test, both on the ag side and whatever, it is not just impacts to farming practices, it's impact to farming and forest practices in the EFU zone. So that's for the farm impacts test. We call it the farm impacts test because it's in the farm zone, but it's farm and forest practices.
So it encompasses all of the resource lands or working lands, designated resource lands, as we like to call them. Okay. Not going to bring that up. So I also want to mention one of the other things here that's a key component of the program, and that's minimum parcel sizes. You go to the next slide. So I mentioned earlier that one of the things that Senate Bill 101 did, yeah, sorry for the text slide, but Senate Bill 101 did was it put this into statute. This is the state's agricultural land use policy as articulated by the legislature. It's in 215-243. And I would highly suggest taking the time to read it on your own and thinking about it, because it's actually really beautifully written. And this is an expression of, sort of why the legislature created the program the way it did. And
I have this framed and up in my office.
there you go. That's how important
People always remember Senate Bill 100, but 101 is
So when 101 was enacted, this became a part of Chapter 215, and Goal 3 was actually adopted years later, and references this policy. So there's an articulation here of what we talked about earlier, like why preservation of the agricultural lands, not just to support the agricultural economy, but all of these other values, all of these other public values that are provided by the protection of agricultural lands are so important to the state of Oregon that this program is merited, including the provision of the compensatory benefits associated with it. But what I wanted to bring up right now is in the in sub 2 there, and that is this articulation that there is a need to preserve agricultural lands in large blocks in order to preserve the agricultural economy. And this is an important concept. So kind of like habitat of a farm landscape, if it becomes fragmented, its value to the natural resource economy and those other values that are mentioned in sub 1 up here is diminished when it becomes fragmented, just like habitat for sage-grouse or other animals. And because of that, there is a minimum parcel size standard in the program. So for farm and forest lands, it's 80 acres. In most cases, it's 160 acres for rangeland. There are provisions in our rules that allow counties to designate a smaller minimum parcel size. It's called the go below standard. If there is an agricultural area that's identified where smaller parcel sizes are common or appropriate for the protection of that type, that flavor of agricultural activity. So there are a couple of counties out there that do have smaller minimum parcel sizes that have made use of the go below standard. And then since Matri is on, Matri is from Washington County, which is one of 2 counties in the state that are marginal lands counties, and they have different rules. And they can apply smaller minimum parcel sizes to marginal lands, which are lower quality lands. I don't want to talk too much about marginal lands and the secondary lands debates of the 1980s here, because I don't think it's going to be relevant to much of what we're going to discuss in the meeting. And it's not fun. All right.
PTSD.
Are there any questions or anything else anybody wanted to bring up before we go on to soils?
Hillary, I just want to comment. A lot of people will ask me, will think that the minimum parcel size means the size of parcel that a dwelling can be sited on. And when you're talking about minimum parcel sizes, you mean the smallest size for a new parcel and a land division. Yes, I think it's important.
Yeah, when I say minimum parcel size, and I'm smiling right now because of the question that Maitri asked me a couple of days ago. Anyway, that I haven't responded to, but I will. But yes, so the minimum parcel size standards applies generally to new land divisions. There were a number of what I will call substandard parcels that existed at acknowledgement. Okay.
And I'll just add to this, because ODA gets pulled into this a lot. The minimum parcel size is supposed to be what is appropriate to maintain commercial agriculture in the area. So it's not based on what is a farm. It's not based on what is a dwelling. It's based on a lot of times what is the appropriate unit in for the type of agriculture in the area. So like where Mike's from, orchards are predominant. A lot of smaller parcels are farms. So you'll see 20s and you'll see 40-acre minimum parcel sizes, but they still have to be, employed in commercial farm use. And land divisions are for agriculture. They're not for anything else but agriculture. If you're going outside of agriculture, then there's provisions for non-farm land divisions, which are much, much more difficult.
Right, which we will be talking about non-farm property line adjustments later on in our third meeting. Okay. Anything else before soils?
Is the minimum parcel size ever changed by counties? Should it be revised?
Yeah.
So historically, there's been some change, but not much. When we did, in the days when periodic review happened, it doesn't happen anymore. That's an issue for me, but anyways, we would look at certain areas and determine whether or not that was an appropriate minimum parcel size, and not always to go smaller, but even to go larger, for example, in rangeland areas and the like. But there have been several go belows over the years. I've reviewed, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them at least, and including forest land, not just in farmland. And again, it's really, it's not common, but it does happen. And a lot of it happened though up front when we were going through acknowledgement and the like. There's some have happened since acknowledgement, either through periodic review or through a plan amendment, a legislative plan amendment, not a quasi-judicial one. But it doesn't happen too often. But several of the counties have go belows in them statewide, both east and west side. So.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to soils really quickly. All right, so at our 4th meeting, our November meeting, we are going to talk about soil challenges, and we're going to talk about the definitions of agricultural land and forest land at our November meeting. So this is a little bit of a prep for that. So one of, the things that is often cited as a virtue of Oregon's land use planning program is that it is based on sound and scientific data that has been provided by the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So NRCS soils mapping is a fundamental component of the land use planning program. Our definition of agricultural lands, the first step of that definition is based on NRCS soils. The definition of high value farm land in part is also based on NRCS soils. So I'm going to talk a little bit about capability classification, farmland classification, and vegetative productivity classes as well. So this is a visual that I hope will help sort of like anchor what this looks like. So NRCS has an online tool. It's called the Web Soil Survey. I'm sure most of the planners in this work group have used it and are pretty familiar with it. But you can look up a property, find an area of interest, and pull up all sorts of different ratings associated with mapped soil units. So if you look at this map here, for example, the very bottom sliver where it says 192A, that's Yahhat Silty Loam. Okay. That Yahhat Silty Loam, if you look in the NRCS database, has a capability classification of 2. So capability classifications are ranked on a scale of between 1 and 8, with 1 being it is awesome for crop production, very few limitations, etc. 8 would be like a sheet of shale, like very many limitations for essentially crop production. Okay, so this particular soil unit here, the 192A Yahhat Silty Loam, is class 2, which means it is very lovely soil for crop production and other agricultural uses. Then we look at the other soil units here. The 170A is also class 2. The 174C in yellow is class 4. The blue ones on the other side are on the north side of this road, where there's a steep slope that gets steeper as it goes up into the Tillamook State Forest for this particular property. And so you'll see lower class ratings in part due to the slope of those properties in the forest. Okay. So then there's another rating that you can look up that is also important to the land use planning system, and the definitions of high value farmland which are partly based on class and also based on farmland classification. So it's a different type of rating in that database. If you pull up farmland classification, you will find things like prime if drained, prime if irrigated, unique, and farmland of statewide importance. Land is classified as high value farmland if it's prime or unique. The farmland in statewide importance isn't related to the land use system necessarily based on that rating. So if you look at this particular, the orange and green, because it is class 2, class 4, and predominantly so, it's considered agricultural land under the definition of agricultural land in our rules. And it's also considered high value farmland because it's predominantly class 2. Actually, full tract is. We looked at a tract layout, maybe not from this particular snippet. The other thing that's important to understand is the vegetative productivity rating. Now we're talking about forest lands. And vegetative productivity ratings are measured by cubic feet per acre per year. And this being the Tillamook State Forest on the west side of the coastal range has a very high vegetative productivity rating or forest productivity rating in the NRCS database. So even though it's class 6 soils, you'll see that it has a vegetative productivity of over 150 cubic feet per acre per year for both of those blue mapped areas there. So I thought I'd provide this as a visual for the soils program. And it's actually common to kind of see this where there's no vegetative productivity rating for the lower lying lands here. That's actually pretty common to find, that in these valleys with very fertile farmlands, there's no forest productivity rating for those soil units. All right, and it's also fairly common to find, I mean, there is one here, but forest lands without a capability class rating as well. So we're going to spend our fourth meeting talking a lot about soils as they relate to the definition of agricultural land, and a process in our rules that allows an owner to have somebody come out and do a site-specific survey in order to challenge essentially the soils ratings that have been provided by NRCS here. Through a land use process that considers the definition of agricultural land. So there is no soil challenge for high value farmland. That's very clear in our rules, but that is not permissible. We have guidance documents published that effect as well. But when there's a question as to whether something or not should be classified as agricultural lands, there is a process available for that. And there's quite a lot of folks who are interested in how that is working or is not working for the program. The one other thing that I'll say about the definition of high value farmland is that there is an old definition of high value farmland, and it is primarily soils based. It is based on soil capability class and farmland rating. So it's based on both, the prime farmland designation and the capability class, whether it's class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. And it is regionally specific. So there's one definition for the Willamette Valley. There's a definition for west of the Coast Range. There's a definition for west of Highway 101, and then there's a definition that applies to the rest of Oregon. Then there is a new definition of high value farmland that was created for Measure 49. It's in 195-300, and it includes the old definition with some different dates certain for data to be used to make those determinations. And then it also includes other factors like suitability for viticulture and presence of water rights and land planted in grapes. So it's a more expansive definition. And this new definition at 195-300 has been applied to new uses and pilot projects and processes that have been adopted or enacted since 2010. So you find the new definition of 195-300 applied to solar siting, the golf courses, and to urban growth boundary expansions. So I will stop there on soils and move into wrap up, unless, did you want to add anything else on soils and what more?
Take soils forever.
I know you can take soils forever and just go on and on.
I can say one thing, my experience of using the soil survey, and I've been using it for a long time, back when it was just paper, now it's online or whatever. In my experience, the soil survey has gotten nothing but better. It is in my experience, an ODA does review soils, soils tests for a whole lot of record dwellings. There's not very many of them left, but after the Measure 49 thing, we did a lot of those or whatever. And my experience in implementing those is the soil survey is correct 99+% of the time. You can get specifics in terms of a line moving one way or the other a little bit, but the NRCS soil survey is a very well documented and scientific approach to things. It's the issues that I hear more now in terms of the use of soil scientists and the like relate to as much about the fact that it's a very one-sided. You can't have people from the other side challenge the review that has been done. In other words, access the land and look at it. DLCD has no authority to say yes or no. They're just saying, oh, all the things that are required in the report are there. ODA, we deny soils reports. We have in the past, we've found them to be not sound and scientific. So that'll be something that I think will be an issue when we get into this. So. Yeah.
We'll talk about that more and sort of what we're seeing in some of the reports as well.
One thing I've noticed that we may talk about at some point in the process is if it's ag land, the planners do not come up with a forest productivity amount to use for the forest template dwelling test. And they've been just putting in zeros. which there needs to be some method to do that.
And that's a really good point, and Hillary kind of touched on it. For agriculture, you can, for agricultural land, you can both get a capability class for ag, and you can get a forest rating. If you can grow crops, you can grow trees. For forest land, a lot of times, the NRCS did not calculate a capability rating, just simply because they didn't feel they needed to do it, because most forest land is not really going to have agriculture. I've told them that that's problematic in some cases. I know where there's areas of Hood River County is a great example where they're converting forests to agriculture, and we need that capability rating. But generally, for agricultural land, you can get both ratings. For forest land, you can generally only get the forest capability rating.
So I think it is a problem, Mike, and I think this is one of the things that we're going to talk about in our fourth meeting. And John Tarzik from Department of Forestry is on the line, and we're going to talk about the identified data sources that are in 660-006-0010 sub 2. That are meant to be used in post-acknowledgement plan amendment. They're going to be talking about alternative sort of data sources for identifying forest lands.
I think back when I was a county planner, we used ODR stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so ODR maps and other resources like that, and the sufficiency of those sources for potentially new alternative sources.
I have two questions. One, can you remind me again, farmland of statewide importance?
So it has no bearing on the land use planning program.
Let me tell you what that means. In every other state but Oregon, that means something. In Oregon, because we have high value farmland, we incorporate prime and unique into our definitions. Farmland of statewide significance in the Oregon Soil Survey means that it's zoned for exclusive farm use. That's all it means. In other states, that's where you pick up the unique farmland, for example, instead of prime. So it'd be some soils that are the designation of land as unique under the NRCS system involves a local process where the farmers get together, the NRCS, and they say, well, this soil doesn't show up as prime, but it's really, really important for us in this county or in this state for all these different reasons. A lot of times orchard lands, for example, are unique, whatever. And so it'll get a unique designation. That's different from state to state. And so in other states, that unique will show up in farmland of statewide definitely. We don't have a lot of unique farmland in Oregon simply because it was already protected when they started to talk about it in Oregon. So they just didn't do unique. I can only think of one or two unique soils in the whole state, one in the South Coast for those cranberry bogs, and the other is the Lake LaBiche stuff just outside of Salem. That's it. Other states have all kinds of unique stuff. So.
And my second thought, I'm thinking about values of Oregon and protection and conservation, and the cubic feet per acre a year made me think about carbon sequestration and soil, and when, like, as we have the science and the data, do you see that as being another layer of value or to be factored in helping us protect? Because if, like, when you're saying class 1, 2, 3, 4 don't need to have that because it's already the highest producing for the vegetables or the other commodities, I guess I'm wondering how the next layer can be incorporated, or if it could be, if that's something that we could bring up eventually. I'm just thinking out loud.
I think it's a very good idea. These conversations are really timely and often, and clearly, particularly our Western forests have potential for carbon sequestration. It'd be really interesting, John, to see if there was a way to come up with a carbon specific designation for lands like high value farmlands, or I'd be curious to know if there are certain soil types that are more suitable for climate friendly practices. Like, are there particular soil types that are better suited to dryland farming? Or,
I can see this as an issue that comes out as it relates to potential legislative action, because definitions are either goals, so it'd be a goal amendment, or potentially, definitions in the rules too, whatever. But For example, when you look at the soil survey now, for agricultural land, there is a new attribute that you can use to measure the quality of farmland, and it's called the crop productivity index. And it's in the soil survey, it's in the web soil survey, whatever, and it rates soils from 1 to 4, and it's 1.2, 1.3, 8, and it really gets down to the capability of that land to grow crops. It's even much more detailed than the capability system that we're all used to, the 1 through 8. It get really, well, Jackie, you saw me give some of that information as related to the Washington County farmland. I was talking about CPI. It really shows that, gee, this is not only prime soils, but this is the best prime soils in the world because the crop productivity index, so it's another data layer that long-term we might, in land use planning in Oregon want to take a look at. I specifically would be interested in seeing that used in determining what is high value farmland, for example.
I'm feeling like politically, the landscape of Oregon is the education of the value is not just for the food and fiber. It's people saying, I would rather have housing, whether it's affordable or not, versus food, fiber, security. So I just feel like people aren't seeing the whole story on the maps, that the soil is obviously not important enough. I don't know why, but that's why I'm asking about having some carbon air quality sequestration type of information.
And I know that Department of Forestry has actually done a lot of work looking at carbon sequestration potentials for Oregon's forests. I don't know if you want to add your 2 cents in on that, John.
Yeah. And it's a very good subject of conversation, and particularly I think it came up in the course of this conversation with respect to the Tillamook and the West Side Forest, obviously having tremendous potential and capability for carbon sequestration interests. And Jim touched on this to a degree as well with respect to the soils. It's interesting from a productivity standpoint. I think the baseline is 20 cubic feet per acre per year from the forest side. And when we get to the conversation around sequestration, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of challenge. So, you touched on the fiber security, but then also at the same time, long-term sequestration. But realistically, a 20 cubic acre forest that's been established has the same potential and the same capability, because sequestration and storage become two competing, not necessarily competing, but definitely two different interests, right? The active intake through sequestration versus the long-term storage of the forest and landscape. And interestingly enough, in speaking of carbon and some of these other uses, I'm thinking in particular of recent sequestration programs that were enacted in Southwest Oregon that ran into some challenges, and fire has introduced some concerns there, and then subsequent reestablishment, which it becomes a milieu. And I could probably eat up the rest of our time, obviously, talking about the dynamics there. But the long and short of it is, it is a very critical component. But that said, with productivity in an established forest land, that sequestration potential and opportunity exists almost regardless of the soil classification. The establishment of the forest is the primary focus, or the primary driver of the potential. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to eat the time.
I think that's sort of it will likely be a recurring theme with this group, like wanting to talk for hours about that. I'm anticipating we'll have that, we'll hear that multiple times throughout this conversation.
I really got my tongue because I really wanted to talk solar there too, because there's but I'm going to hold it.
There'll be more opportunity for that soon. Anyway, so we have about 15 minutes left in this meeting. So I do want to just touch base on next steps. So we can take down the PowerPoint now and just provide a framework for what we're going to do in the next couple of weeks and then provide folks an opportunity to ask any questions about that specific task request. So at the beginning of the meeting, we talked about a successful outcome for the scoping process looking like a sketch for a work plan proposal that staff can present to LCDC for additional feedback and direction. And then I described the tool that we're going to be using, which is we're going to call the draft issues matrix. All right. So that draft issues matrix, I am going to send it out to all of you later. And it is going to be posted online to the project website by Monday at the latest. And when you look at that matrix document, you're going to see a couple of components. So that matrix document is going to have a column for a statement of need. And it's going to be populated with a variety of statements of needs related to different issues. Next to the statement of need, there's going to be a blank column for proposed actions, and then another column for additional information and data that is needed. And then there are going to be columns for prioritization of issues and prioritization of actions, as well as a couple of other things. For the first task, what I'm going to ask is that you all review those statements of need and identify what's missing. Okay. And I think what we're looking for through this process are things that are going to have an impact to the program if we adjust them. Things that are already having an impact to the program because they're not clear, or there's needs to be something fixed with it, right? So I'm going to ask you to identify additional items to add to that list, focusing on crafting a statement of need. And then for the statements of need that exist within that matrix, if you feel like they do not capture the issue as you understand it, go ahead and propose edits to it. And then I would ask you to prioritize the issues in terms of how they are impacting the program from your perspective. So just two columns that we're working with right now, the statements of need and the impact of issues column. And I'm going to ask if you could have your edits back by September 13th. That will give me time to compile them all into a single document and post it before our next meeting on September 20th. So that when we meet again on September 20th, we'll have a compilation of those suggestions that we can talk about. Okay. Okay, so a little bit about upcoming meetings. So at the September 20th meeting, it's my intention that we're going to talk about the first 10 issues that are in the issues matrix. Okay. At least half of those are items that are identified for conforming rulemaking. And so we don't need to talk about those unless you have significant questions about them, but they're going to be in that issues matrix, and they are already identified with an action of conforming rulemaking. The next 5 issues on that list that we're going to be talking about on the 20th are replacement dwellings, commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, the terms incidental and subordinate and necessary to support. We're going to be talking about the farm impacts test, and we're going to be talking about transportation facilities. And that might seem like a lot, but the commonality with all of those issues is that there is a potential for codification of case law standards there. So thinking again about the simple rulemaking that we might be moving forward those might be candidates for that. So, so I'm looking forward to the meeting on the 20th. And, at the meeting on the 20th, again, we're going to talk about how we'll identify the new issues, how we're going to address and approach the new issues as well. Are there any questions on that before I give teasers for the other meetings? Jackie?
I am not familiar with, I have not studied or seen a farm impacts test. And so like, is it 100 pages, 5 pages? I'm hoping to at least see
All of
one
the above.
to know what it is and what a good one is.
Could we get an example?
So what we'll most likely be talking about is the Yamhill County case, Stop the Dump versus Yamhill County. Unless there are suggestions for inclusion of other case law standards related to the farm impacts test as well, in addition to sort of the
About the trail one?
Well, yeah, well, I think there's two questions, there's two issues here. There is interpretation of what the standard says, not what's in the, but just what it says. So remember, there's two prongs to it. Will not increase the cost of accepted farming and forest practices and will not adversely affect surrounding. I'm not hitting the exact same words, whatever. And there's a lot of interpretation in there. The Stop the Dump case out of Yamhill County defines those terms much more what they mean. It doesn't talk about what's in a farm management plan. It talks about here's what those mean. And that's really a simple codification of law. And to be quite honest, when Blair worked 20 some years ago at 1,000 Friends and I was at DLCD, we talked about it clear back then that this was really needed to be better defined. And it took the Supreme Court 25 years later to better define how to interpret what that is. It doesn't get to what should be in a farm impacts test. It talks about things like it's farm by farm. It talks about cost is not, is an issue. It's more of changing in practice. Like that's what the Supreme Court decision says. It'll be interesting for me to hear from the county planners because I've reviewed a lot of farm impact tests over the time, and I've seen 200-page long ones dealing with a transmission line between Boardman and Idaho to a lawyer having one paragraph basically saying there's no impacts because there's, because everybody likes us, without getting into it. And those are the extremes. And so, maybe the rule does need to better say what should be in a farm impacts test. But I will say this, that the case law out of the Stop the Dump case gets us there a long ways because it really says, what has to be done in those conclusions. And to get to those conclusions, it's going to be interesting what it takes to get to those conclusions. But I will say this, since the Stop the Dump case came out about 2 years ago now, it's been a lot easier for me to, make the arguments I've been making for 30 years.
So any other questions about that from the Zoom? So that's the intention.
I was just doing.
Okay. So in October, so September, we'll talk about those first 10 uses on the list. In October, the intention is to talk about home occupations and short-term rentals, non-farm dwelling and non-farm PLAs, property line adjustments or boundary line adjustments, and goal 3 guidance. And then for November, the intention right now is to talk about soils challenges, forest land data hierarchy, rangeland definitions, and agricultural lands definition, which is part of the rangeland definition discussion. All right, so a very soils heavy November. That's the intention right now. Those draft agenda ideas, go ahead and publish the draft agendas as they are right now with the understanding that as we get comments in, those agendas might be modified over time. Okay, so we have 5 more minutes left. Are there any questions from anybody about what we're asking for or anything else, Mike?
It seems like a lot, which is fine. Is there any way to make the meeting slightly longer if we need that? I mean, you've done the poll and everybody's committed their schedule. Probably people don't have more time now. But is there any way to make that?
Yeah, I think there's an agreement within the group that we can certainly go long or plan to go long. I don't want to to go over without planning to go over and making sure that it's published to respect, people's time and desire to participate. But if we feel like there's a need to have a longer meeting, we can take a different poll about adding some time on or after a meeting. Anything else from the Zoom chat? It's been a bit quiet.
I think the way you set it up and giving us homework assignments will help the meetings be efficient and give us a good shot of getting through all this, even though it is a lot.
Yeah, there is a lot to cover here. So I think the homework will help, and so that we can have quick, efficient discussions for these meetings. There's a lot to cover. Yeah. All right. Well, I don't mind wrapping up 3 minutes early. If nobody else has any other comments or questions out there today.
Hillary, if I could just make a suggestion, if any of the group members have a question about the homework or assignment or specifics before the meeting that you'd like to try to talk to, well, you will want to talk to Hillary, not me, but if you'd like to talk to Hillary about that, I'll offer her or perhaps Jim as well, if there's some specific technical questions or other policy questions that you'd like to get an answer before the meeting, please reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to reach out to me at any time during the process with questions, clarifications. I'm not quite understanding the concern with this particular issue. Whatever, like I'm here, I'm very invested in this process. And so, I want to make sure it goes smoothly for everybody. And, I think this is a great educational opportunity as well for folks that are following along on the YouTube channel, as well as for folks in the working group. So I'm really excited to be able to be doing this.
Hey, Jennifer, I'm going to give you a call in the next couple of days. I got something I need to talk to you about. So just not.
Hillary, I do have one question. Will you be linking to the case law we'll be discussing? Because some of it I know I'm familiar with and some of it I'm not.
Sure, good question. Yeah, we can send out links to all sorts of things. Yeah. And it's been suggested that if anybody wanted more background information, that maybe folks would like to read The Long and Winding Road, or Ed Sullivan has 2 papers that are really great. But if you are, a land use planner working on resource issues, I highly recommend reading. One is a collaboration with Ron Eber. It's called The Long and Winding Road to Farmland Protection in Oregon. I'm sure I messed up that title. And the other is Ed Sullivan's History of Forest Lands. I think you have both of those documents. I think you've read them both. And then, I can send out links to some of the cases that are going to be associated with some of the things we're going to be talking about tomorrow as well. Not tomorrow. On September 20th. Tomorrow, everybody's getting ready for the long weekend, right? You're right. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so very much again for donating your time to this effort. Again, I'm really excited. Looking forward to continued conversations with you all. And again, I spoke a lot today, and I am looking forward to listening for most of the rest of the meetings and hearing all your ideas. So, all right. Thank you again, and have a great long weekend. And we'll see you all.